Bonjour Charles Yu, vous avez étudié la biologie avant de travailler comme avocat. Comment avez-vous trouvé votre chemin vers la poésie et la littérature?
Yes, hi, Karen. I'm so excited to be here. I found my path randomly, by accident mostly. It really only looks like a path in retrospect, but at the time, it felt like uh, I was sort of going sideways sometimes, going backwards sometimes. But throughout it all, I always loved to read, and so that was something that sustained me through both university and even in law school I was still reading fiction. And what happened was, as an undergraduate I had actually minored in poetry, so I wrote poems, but I didn't write short stories. And then when I started practicing as a lawyer, I something in me kind of switched on and I started to write fiction. And so I was doing that while practicing law for over a decade, close to 13 years. And so I started to publish stories and then eventually books, um, meanwhile still working full time as a lawyer.
Trouver sa place est au cœur de vos livres et du roman Chinatown intérieur aux forges du Vulcain. Comment avez-vous trouvé la vôtre?
Yes, and thanks for mentioning Oforge. I've had the great, privilege of working with David Moulman, and the team there. And it's really been a pleasure and an honor to work with them. And I think the theme is important to me. Well, for many reasons. I think one, I wanted to write a story that captured something about, you know, the feeling, the subjective sort of inner states that these characters experience as being not part of the main story. That sort of, for me, was kind of, I was searching for a long time about how to write it. And when I sort of, you know, first kind of came up with the idea of Willis Wu, and sort of heard his voice in my head, that was a kind of eureka moment for me in many ways, because it sounded like something that was hitting at a truth, which was, at least for my experience as an Asian American, it has often felt like I'm part of a story that is not about me, and really doesn't pay much attention to people like me for the most part. And um, you know, once I sort of found Willis as a kind of way into this world, it just became a lot of fun. And at times not so fun. At times it was difficult and frustrating and painful to write. But yeah, it was really kind of a story that I circled around for years and eventually found my way through this character.
Vous écrivez que quand on dit américain, qu'imaginez-vous? Un blanc, un noir? Nous sommes là depuis 200 ans. Les premiers Chinois sont arrivés en 1815. Pourquoi est-ce que mon visage m'empêche d'être américain? Comment avez-vous dès lors perçu votre identité américaine et vos origines taïwanaises?
Yes, thank you. I have many feelings about it, and my parents did, as you mentioned, they're Taiwanese. They immigrated from Taiwan at this point, over 50 years ago. So they are Americans. They're naturalized citizens. They've lived two-thirds of their lives here in this country where I am, um, and so they've lived here much longer than they ever lived in their quote home country. And yet there's, as a feeling, as I think is common to probably many immigrants, of dislocation, of not quite having a sense of being either of this place, and also knowing that their country of origin has changed a lot since they left. And so not quite feeling completely at home in either place. And as the son of them, I was born here. I only really know the U.S. as a home, and I've never lived abroad for any period of time other than just vacations. So I and yet I have this face, I have this body, I have my parents as their sort of background, and it just there's a kind of mismatch between, well, for me anyway, how I look on the outside and how I feel on the inside, and that's not always something that is easy to explain. That mismatch, that feeling of, well, you see me one way, but that's not necessarily how I see myself. And so that's another thing that I think I really wanted to explore through Willis and the other characters in this book.
Les États-Unis et la Californie symbolisent la diversité, mais vous nous rappelez la véritable histoire des Asiatiques en Amérique, ces 200 ans à être d'éternels étrangers. Comment expliquer ce paradoxe entre une société ouverte et une société qui peut vous rejeter rien qu'à cause de votre apparence?
I think paradox is a great way to put it. California is, an extremely diverse place. Los Angeles, where I grew up, is, I've heard it called the most diverse city in the world. I'm not sure exactly what that's based on, but and it it certainly was I was very fortunate to grow up in Southern California, I think. And yet, for me, in terms of being accepted, in terms of not having to face, overt discrimination very often, um, and yet, there's a feeling of being an outsider at times. There's still a self-consciousness. There's certain inescapable features, physical, cultural, that that can, I think of it as sort of like long stretches of not thinking about, you know, being Asian, punctuated by sudden, you know, and not always welcome kind of reminders. Oh, you're different, or I might be the only Asian in a room, say in a work environment, or someone just might call it into question. And now, of course, with the recent surge in anti-Asian sentiment and attacks, it's the most sort of, it's the most terrible reminder, right? Is that it's very easy to single out Asians, that as much as we might be living in this society and might be part of the fabric of the society, at any moment, someone can easily point to someone and say, that's an outsider. And so on the one hand, there's opportunity. There has been for my parents. They've made their lives here. They had careers, they raised their family here. And on the other hand, in 2021, we can still be seeing the kinds of attacks, the kind of harassment, that happens. And, that really is a paradox. I do think that media perceptions, and this is where the book kind of enters this sort of argument, or I don't know if it's an argument. This is where the sort of book is, the sphere of interest is how much TV and film shape the perception of Americans, so that even as you have many Asians living in America for many generations, there can still be this alternate dimension called like Hollywood land, I guess, where you don't see very much. You don't see Asians as part of life, as part of the, if TV and film is kind of the collective story that we're telling about our country, and Asians aren't a part of that story, then I think that people can't help but be influenced by that, whether it's consciously or on a deeper kind of unconscious level.